you're dealing with things in a positive way. I was wondering if there was any period of your life where you weren't doing that and you were really on a negative trajectory.
I mean, yeah, of course. I've struggled with depression throughout my life. Like, the grieving process of like losing my father at a young age. Like, I've done a lot of lashing out and like crazy shit, like kind of which I realize stems from a lot of that. And I don't really have advice for anyone because like I'm not even sure how I ended up kind of like manifesting through that stuff. But as far as I'm sorry, I lost my train of thought a
It's
little
all good,
bit.
bro.
Um,
Just asking you about like if the point at where you were at a negative
oh yeah,
trajectory
yeah.
in your life. And
So yeah, I have had some negative time periods. You know, um, there's been a lot of drug use, like in my life, and like with the people around me, and I try to to see these experiences as a way to learn and grow. Um, and yeah, I mean, there's positive aspects to this stuff too. I recently had a conversation with a close friend, and we were talking about dark periods and darkness, and the duality sort of idea, and the fact that like you can't experience like hyper positive moments without
yes.
having like
Yeah.
some moments in obscurity, I suppose. So yeah, I mean, we've all had some major ups and downs. I mean, we've been through it. I've been through it all. Relationship issues, stuff with like close friends, and so life's a long road, and I've seen a lot.
How'd you
So
get into graph?
graffiti. I
You got into it in Buffalo, right?
Yeah, I started writing in Buffalo. I grew up in Buffalo, New York. Um, I've been living in Brooklyn for the past 19 years. Um, and when I was in Buffalo as a kid, I, um, I remember this quite well, actually. I've mentioned this in other interviews too. Um, the year that Spray Can Art came out, I was gifted that as a Christmas gift. My mother was a teacher for the Buffalo Public Schools, and she was really sweet and supportive. She is still very sweet and supportive. So like, you know, I don't think she realized like the can of worms she opened by
Mm-hmm.
like by like giving me that gift, but it
So you didn't write at the time.
no, I was a kid. I mean, the
Okay.
book came out, I think, when I was 8 years old. That's when I got it.
Okay.
So, like, that was just like, I had been drawing. I was really into comic books. I was into like cartoons and like illustration. And I've been drawing and painting my whole life. So, when I got that book, it just kind of like was this like mind altering moment where like I realized that this was possible, and like, and then I don't think I stopped exploring these ideas
Mm-hmm.
like ever since. I didn't start writing graffiti until I think the like late 90s, mid 90s, late 90s. I started dabbling. Um, in Buffalo, I fucked around with just like spray painting like side of the garage and the back in some alley in the neighborhood, and like some like cuddy little spots in the woods, like whatever I could find I would like go, we were doing that. And then I don't think I really started focusing on graffiti as much as when I moved to San Francisco.
Mm.
So I went to San Francisco right out of high school. I was fortunate. The reason why I ended up going there was because growing up, my mother's best friend lived in San Francisco, so that was like a place that we had visited a handful of times, and I fell in love with the city. Like it was one of my like first dreams was to like move there.
Really?
So yeah, my first opportunity, I remember just like trying to find a college to go to. My mother was really supportive. She really encouraged me to like pursue higher education. So she was with it, and like basically she helped me the best she could to like get in over there, and yeah, I went to school out there, and that was like a pivotal moment. I started seeing like good graffiti there.
Yeah.
At the time, there was a lot of crossover that was incredible. Like San Francisco had an amazing scene. This was '97. And there were a lot of New York writers and like world traveling
Mm-hmm.
writers like passing through. I think it was kind of like a, looking back, it had like a really amazing moment, and I
Mm-hmm.
got to see the tail end of that.
Mm.
So
How does it feel to look at the scene now in San Francisco? Because
Yeah,
I,
what
I only
happened?
I only can picture it
yeah,
as if it was New York City. Like I would think, how does imagine New York City just got completely buffed, no graffiti at all. I would be like, that's crazy. I would want to move right away. Like
yeah,
it would just feel like a very unnatural place because it just loses its touch of sanity in a way.
Yeah, how did that happen?
Yeah.
I don't really know. I mean, I was lucky enough to kind of like, I spent about 4 years there, and then like I came back to Buffalo for a short period of time, and then I moved to New York. So I didn't really see the ultimate decline, but I was so in love with that city that I was actually visiting quite frequently, and I watched it kind of deteriorate that way. But I don't have an answer. I think it just got really square. It's
Yeah.
just, I mean, the tech shit happened. That was well after I
Mm-hmm.
was there. It just got kind of like corporate, like whitewashed, and it did feel like a really special, like cool, creative city, and it felt like very similar to what I envisioned New York would be like. But I think it's a different energy, so um, they just weren't able to like keep that vibe,
Mm-hmm.
and the graffiti quality in San Francisco like really plummeted. Like
Yeah.
these kids, I think maybe it was, I think this the lack of style in terms of development actually happened probably because of the buff.
Mm.
I would like to theorize that the graffiti felt less precious because it was probably like getting taken out at such a
Yeah.
rapid pace that these kids didn't try to even hone the
Yeah.
craft.
That makes sense.
So they were just fucking around, scribbling on shit. So that just seems like what happened. But to be honest, like I sort of let that go, on my San Francisco experience. Um, it was very formative for me, um, going there right out of high school. But and I felt very like married to that city for a long time. I was very loyal, but then once I came to New York, like everything changed. This, was where I was meant to be, and
Mm.
like it was a nice
What made you come
transition.
from SF to New York?
Well, basically, when I finished school, I was in Buffalo for a small amount of time, and I just was craving that big city life. San Francisco was very like uh, adventurous and exciting, and there's a big city energy there that I really crave. So New York just seemed to be the next direction for me. Interestingly enough, I didn't come to New York often when I was a kid. We had no ties here, my family, so there was no real reason. My mother, as a single mother, she wasn't dragging two boys to New York City. I think it was a pretty like difficult task. We've come through the area, but I didn't start visiting New York until I came a couple times on my own when I was around 18. And then, living in San Francisco, I had to kind of like started to relate the city life to what I envisioned it must be like in New York, and the dream kind of evolved from there.
Mm-hmm. When you moved out of Buffalo to go to SF, how was the Buffalo scene? Because you're saying that in SF there was a high quality graph, and like I said, I've never been to Buffalo, but I know some pretty good writers have come out of there.
Yeah, Buffalo's interesting. I think that Buffalo doesn't have a super strong history. The writers that we were able to look up to were like predominantly like Puerto Rican kids that had like ties to Brooklyn, including like Matthew's father and like his friends, who we later became friends with. So Buffalo is one of those interesting cities. I mean, it's quite old fashioned. It's very segregated. It's almost quadrants. I uh, I lived in Buffalo, in the city of Buffalo, until I was 13, and then my mother moved us out to the suburbs. She was able to get a house for us, so we were really fortunate for that. So I've seen Buffalo kind of like, really struggle. It's a very poor city. It's it's just the economy is just awful. So like I feel like a lot of the people in Buffalo, there wasn't that much graffiti at the time because I think like kids weren't comfortable with like they weren't traveling very often and getting like outside influence, and the graffiti that developed there was quite strong, but I think the original roots are actually most likely from New York.
Hmm.
So there wasn't too much happening when I came from Buffalo to SF. I wasn't that familiar with like there wasn't enough of a history there to like to give me a gauge of what's good necessarily. I had a good sense of like tagging and throw ups from like the kids that I admire from Buffalo, but there's just wasn't much happening. Also in Buffalo, I was really lucky to have trains around me. It's a huge like industrial city, so there's just mad train yards and freight trains. So one of the ways that we became familiar with graffiti when I was first starting to get interested was just looking at the trains. So we would make efforts to like watch the trains, bench the trains, start to photograph the trains. I was always looking for like New York shit. I was always looking for like anything good. And so
It's crazy what you can see on those freights, man. You walk in somewhere and you're like,
Yeah.
yo, this dude's what, man?
yeah, it's phenomenal.
insane.
Yeah, they're like it's like a message in a bottle.